Without truth, there can be no justice.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor.
Speak out. Ask those questions. Demand that truth.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of Truth is Justice. The thing with the truth is it's extraordinarily easy to defend. You don't have to worry about mixing up your story or contradicting yourself, or from a legal perspective, aside from those that would argue wrongful conviction type situations, you don't really have to worry about getting yourself into any trouble. In short, if you tell the truth, my view is that you have nothing to worry about. It is a simple enough formula to live by for most people. Tell the truth, and it is simply not possible that you can be caught out. On Thursday for me, Wednesday night for many of you in the US, quite an incredible thing happened. Many of you will already be aware of this, but for those of you not on the relevant social media pages, I'll describe exactly what happened. In my opinion, it is not overstating it to say that this is perhaps the most significant thing to happen in the Melgar case since Sandra's conviction. It has far-reaching ramifications for several of those people involved in this case, and I suggest it is very likely to impact on quite a large number of other cases. I'll expand on exactly why I believe that to be the case a little later. You would all no doubt be aware of the relatively straightforward matter regarding the computer login entries on Mr. Eric Devlin's IT forensic report. You would recall that Mr. Devlin was the forensic IT expert witness offered up by the defence. You would also likely be aware that I engaged in email communications with Mr. Devlin in March of this year. I sent Mr. Devlin emails and he responded to me 5 times. By the time you're listening to this, I've likely uploaded another video to YouTube and to our Facebook page. I encourage you to look at that in conjunction with listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, search for the Truth is Justice channel on YouTube and you'll see the second screen recording video. I initially brought up on our Facebook page and then through our podcast the information provided by Mr. Devlin with respect to the computer login notations contained in his report. I deliberately didn't initially specifically highlight my interactions with Mr. Devlin for the reason that I assumed the matter was somewhat straightforward and would be resolved by merely highlighting the facts. For those that don't know the details, and to give you a short recap on it, here is where it all originated. Now, Mr. Devlin has an item in his report, being the last time each of the systems had a successful user login. That would, to the vast majority of people, be a very straightforward thing to interpret. It means someone performed a successful user login. By someone, I mean a person, interacting with the machine at that time. You cannot get much more straightforward than that, right? If the successful user login field appearing in his report was supposed to mean something entirely different, then why label it a successful user login? And Mr. Devlin said exactly the same thing in his email to me. He notes that the field specifically relates to the last time that a person physically interacted with the machine to perform that process. The other relevant item in his report, the last failed password attempt, I suggest to the vast majority of people is equally straightforward. To the vast majority of people, a failed password attempt field would suggest that it is referring to the last time that someone entered a password in the password field that was incorrect and then submitted that. That could have been done intentionally or unintentionally, but either way, it required physical interaction with the machine at that time. And again, that is exactly what Mr. Devlin told me. He notes how that entry had to refer to the last time that someone physically interacted with the machine and caused a failed password entry to be logged. And both of those matters are straightforward, yet for those absolutely committed to Sandra's innocence, every single angle was taken to try and show that the entries were referring to something different. even though the actual writer of the report confirmed exactly what they were. And myself and a few other people have been working extremely hard on this over the last 3 days. Sleep has been something of a luxury. Thursday night, Friday night, and last night, I think I crept into bed after 4 a.m, after working with people based in the US on these matters for many, many hours. I don't say that for sympathy or thanks or anything else. I say it merely to convey that this matter is extremely important to me. It would be important to any legal professional. The truth is easy, but expressing that to certain people seems to be somewhat more involved. A number of IT professionals, specifically people skilled in forensics, system design and administration and security protocols, have been extremely kind to donate their time to me to help out in these areas. Many of those people have asked not to be identified. And it's funny how you mention a homicide case and IT professionals in this area become reluctant to put their name to it, and I completely understand. To Adam, a huge thanks for your help on this and for pointing me in the right direction to find the right people who have far more knowledge about this than I can ever hope to possess. And one gentleman in particular has provided me with 2 voice clips relating to different related matters. This gentleman is very experienced in this field and clearly very knowledgeable. I have no doubt that his broad reputation in this field is exemplary. Now, those that believe me will need no further proof, and those that don't, well, I could list out his qualifications, provide you with copies of his certifications. Gosh, I could take you along to one of his jobs, and it still wouldn't convince you. If you don't want to believe anything about him, fine. Just listen to what he says. That is what is important here. After assisting with the matter of determining ways to demonstrate the authenticity of the emails, he had the opportunity to listen to our episode covering the original login entries matter. Now, very kindly, he offered up advice on that, and then provided me with an audio recording for me to incorporate into this episode. You will remember my explanation that the incorporation of those fields into Mr. Devlin's report was for a particular purpose. In my opinion, he wouldn't add a failed password attempt field if it wasn't referring to the process of incorrectly entering a failed password. Now, listen to a professional explaining that matter. It's very interesting.
When performing a forensic investigation of a Windows PC, one of the procedures that will be used is to export the system registry file of the operating system. Think of the system registry as a database of the system configuration settings. Within that database, there are groups of settings that are called hives. One of those hives is a security accounts manager, or SAM. The SAM is where information on each user that's created on the computer is stored. That information includes the username, the day of the last password change, and more importantly, the last interactive logon and the last failed logon. For security reasons, this information isn't available to users of the system. It can only be seen when the registry is exported and viewed using special tools. So if you go into your registry now on your running system, you won't be able to see that hive. It is hidden. It would be impossible for someone investigating a computer to mistake that information for another type of login, like a batch process, as those processes and logins do not change the timestamp saved in the SAM. If you had full security logs, you would see every login and every failed login, and you would be able to tell what type of login those were. But within the SAM hive, you only see the last interactive logon and the last interactive failed logon.
Now, hopefully, for the vast majority of you, that clears up the login entry matters once and for all. Following on from my discussion of the login entries and my view of what they meant, there were then repeated requests for me to explain exactly how I could be so confident that the entries in his report meant what they did. So I then reluctantly revealed that I had been in touch with Mr. Devlin and that he had expressed those thoughts directly to me. I say reluctantly because I didn't feel that it was particularly necessary for me to do so. The information he provided was, at least in the digital forensics sphere, and I argue in the sphere of common sense, basic to understand and irrefutable, as the voice recording that you just heard perfectly detailed. Now, I initially explained what Mr. Devlin had said, and then there were public claims by Liz that I was lying about actually being in touch with Mr. Devlin. There were several of these types of posts, and sure enough, quite quickly, people fell back to believing that the logins were simply some automated system event, and that I was lying. Again, very reluctantly, I provided the contents of the first relevant email from Mr. Devlin, and then proof of the original email via screenshots. Of course, people then suggested that those screenshots of the emails were fake. But then Liz posted a message she had received from Ms. Alison Secrest confirming that I was indeed in touch with Mr. Devlin. So at least the claims that I was lying about having any interaction with Mr. Devlin were able to be shelved. Now then you likely would have heard Mr. Max Secrest's discussion with Bob on Bob's show, where Mr. Secrest addresses the, as he calls it, rumours that someone was communicating to Mr. Devlin about the logins. Mr. Secrest suggested during the interview that Mr. Devlin stands by not only the claims in his report, but also, very relevantly, the claims he made on the stand. Now, I've covered before why I felt that that specific assertion was hugely significant, but I believe that that has even more significance now. It is an element of why this matter really is monumental in its importance. Mr. Secrest picked his words very carefully, as he should, and was careful to not provide any specific details about what exactly those logins meant, other than referring to Mr. Devlin's comments that he stands by his findings. Importantly, and I think this is very relevant, Mr. Secrest noted that he had spoken with Mr. Devlin twice about this matter, and there is no reason I can think of to not believe him when he says that. And then that brings us to the events of Wednesday evening and Thursday morning, which you will soon realise take this whole thing to another level. And the consequences for various people, including at the very centre of it Mr. Devlin, are undoubtedly massive. I woke up Thursday morning to a large number of messages from various people and a lot of comments on the Facebook page, all referring to a post made by Liz on the Facebook page associated with Bob's show. The post contained a claimed image of communications between Mr. Devlin and Ms. Alison Secrest, within an interaction between Ms. Secrest and Liz. Importantly, here again, as I'll explain, Liz claims that Ms. Secrest authorised her to share those images publicly. I'll be clear that I do not know that to be true, that Ms. Secrest authorised the publishing of those, but more on that again in a little bit. I'll stop here briefly to explain one thing. The way this matter is being presented involves 4 people: Mr. Devlin, Ms. Secrest, Liz, and myself. I can't guarantee in any way that the interactions taking place, as presented by Liz, actually involve Mr. Devlin and Ms. Secrest. In fact, even if they are partially accurate in that they involve Ms. Secrest, we have no way of confirming from that post whether it actually does involve Mr. Devlin, but it is most definitely presented to us in that way. So, accordingly, throughout this explanation, I'm going to make references which rely on the way that it has been presented. We know that the matter absolutely involves Liz. It is her post, and she shares the images that she claims is from Ms. Secrest, with Ms. Secrest's permission to share them. But I am not at all sure that it can be suggested that Liz has fabricated this. Now think about that for a minute. Aside from really having nothing to gain from it, except perhaps some recognition amongst the people in that Facebook group and the joy of claiming that I'm a liar, it really has very little benefit to her to fabricate these interactions. In fact, the risk of doing so is far greater. It would be very easily identified by Ms. Secrest as being fake, and that would have significant negative consequences for all the things that Liz has spoken about in the past. Presumably, Ms. Secrest would be extremely disappointed in Liz for doing that, and would have ramifications for the way they interact with her in the future with respect to her mother's case. So I think it is very unlikely that Liz has been deceitful with respect to this matter. I believe the image she received from Ms. Secrest is likely genuine. The communications seem to indicate that a person being presented as Mr. Devlin was suggesting that the emails were not genuine. They're the emails between him and I. And we don't see the full message thread, just some cut-off parts, but it starts with someone who we are led to assume is Ms. Secrest saying, and to quote from the message, "I just assumed it was legit since it looked like your email." The response from someone who we are led to assume is Mr. Devlin reads as follows, again quoting the person in that message. "The first couple I received, I wrote back a polite reply saying that I cannot discuss the case with anyone because of attorney-client confidentiality. It was one line, but I quit after the second or third. It looks like the first line might have been one of those replies, but none of the rest of it. That first line used to be my standard reply to everyone who is not the attorney." Now, the person we are led to assume is Ms. Secrest then responds with the following, and again to quote from the message. "That is outrageous. I'm sorry. These people are ridiculous. That," and it cuts off on the word that. Now, if you were scratching your head at that comment attributed to Mr. Devlin, then you were doing exactly what I've been doing for the last few days. It is bizarre for a number of reasons. Now, what should be a very easy statement for him to make, if he indeed is claiming that the emails are false, is not made. He doesn't say they are fake, or I didn't write them, or anything categorical like that. He makes a vague reference to none of the rest of it. But that may be relating to his comment about his first stock standard reply about attorney-client privilege. At least, that was what I thought, until, I believe it was Friday night my time, that Liz posted another message, again presented as a message from Miss Secrest, and presumably again with the authority that it be released publicly and the anticipation that it would be widely publicly shared, and the accompanying consequences of that would attribute to me. If you're starting to see a pattern here, you were spot on. Again, more on that in a little bit. Now that message released by Liz reads as follows, and we can see the last 6 words of someone, perhaps Liz, which goes on to say, and to quote the message, "Like Devlin is lying to us." And then we have a message from what appears to be, at least what is presented as Miss Secrest, and it says the following. "Mac and I respect Eric, as does both the state and defence bar. We have no reason to believe anything other than what he has told us. He saw the email and said he didn't write the second paragraph. Between Mac and me, we have spoken with him at least 4 times and via text about this issue." And there we have what I think will go down as one of the biggest statements made in this case, if it is indeed an accurate reflection of Mr. Devlin's comments. Now, quickly, I'll make the suggestion that the reference to the second paragraph is probably wrong. They were probably meaning to say the third paragraph. Now, go back and have a look at the emails again. Irrespective, both the first, second and third paragraphs are genuine, 100% genuine. So, to disclaim the second paragraph of that email, or the third paragraph, or any of it, is beyond bizarre. Now, not only because the email I've presented and shown via screenshots and via video from the Microsoft Office 365 cloud portal is absolutely not altered in any way, shape or form, but because it makes no sense if you read the subsequent flow of emails. My response to him, following that email, that first email from him, reads as follows. "Dear Mr. Devlin, thank you very much for taking the time to write such a detailed response. I genuinely appreciate it. Kind regards, Sam." And his response to that reads as follows. "If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out." So bizarre, right? And then of course you have the other emails following on from that. And so now on to the emails. And this is where this whole thing gets very interesting. If you enjoy drama, then wow, there is going to be no shortage of it here. I raised this matter publicly back in March, shortly after the contact I had with Mr. Devlin. I never suggested that Mr. Devlin was recanting his testimony. In fact, I worded all of my communications on this very carefully. I did, however, draw attention to the fact that Mr. Devlin's response to Ms. Barnett's question at trial was exceedingly difficult to justify, given the findings in his report. And you'll probably recall that question. Even those who are critical of Ms. Barnett would have to accept that it truly was brilliantly framed. Ms. Barnett asked Mr. Devlin to confirm whether he was testifying that no one logged on or off the computer during that time. And Mr. Devlin replies, correct. The time in question was 7:40 p.m. on December the 22nd to 4 p.m. on December 23rd. Now, I stand by that. I suggest Mr. Devlin has a very serious dilemma in explaining that response. Obviously, the period of relevance of that for the trial has passed for now, but questions with respect to Mr. Devlin's credibility, his integrity, and his professionalism are very rightly now being asked. Liz posted a message, I believe also in March, suggesting it was a communication between her and Miss Secrest, where Miss Secrest references the contact between Mr. Devlin and myself via email. Interestingly, throughout this matter, no one has contacted me about any of this. Not Miss Secrest, not Mr. Secrest, not Liz, not a single member of the defence team. No one has raised this matter with me directly at all. It would have taken a single email, a message, a phone call, or a request to someone else to request for me to contact them, or a request for me to provide the emails, or logs, or anything associated with communications. But nothing. We had a few very vague references by Mr. Secrest and Miss Secrest, and claims that Mr. Devlin was bound by a media contract preventing him from discussing the matter. It all remained vague. There were certainly no claims published that the emails were false or doctored in any way, until last Wednesday. Then it seems to have jumped from Mr. Devlin stands by his testimony and his report to the emails were faked. Are you curious on the timing of it? Well, so was I, and it all came together late yesterday. See, I have very little back-end knowledge of any of this stuff. Our website, the Truth is Justice website, is built in WordPress. I upload the material using an FTP transfer app called FileZilla, and I sometimes upload files directly into WordPress. That's about the extent of my knowledge. I think I built the website using a YouTube guide. I have very little knowledge of back-end system matters. So I called on various people and they started looking into it with me. Well, for me, I couldn't offer up too much. And they were not just looking into it generally or lightly touching the surface. They were diving into this very deeply. They were getting me to perform commands via a shell and looking closely at the back end. All stuff I had no idea of technically. Now, we learnt quite a few things. I'll share with you a comment that someone helping with this said. Actually, probably 5 different people offered up variations on this exact same comment. Shady AF. And you'd all know what the AF refers to. And they weren't referring to me. They were referring to the timing of this and some of the things we see in the email thread and what is being claimed by Mr. Devlin. You see, Microsoft, in this Office 365 environment, holds server logs of these emails for a set period of time, 90 days. Without Microsoft's help, and I'm lodging support requests for this, without that help, the formal server logs are not able to be retrieved. And guess when the 90 days expired on Mr. Devlin's last email to me? Yep, last Wednesday, the 12th of June. I'd say the 90 days, or the count, is to the second. So by the time the message from Liz went up, the server logs that Microsoft holds were no longer accessible by just a matter of hours. In fact, the last email received by me from Mr. Devlin was at 11:07 PM on the 14th of March 2019. You can work out the time difference. If it was coincidence, when this shifted from vague statements to flat-out denials, it was an unbelievably, impeccably timed coincidence. So hours or minutes after the expiration of those logs, it might as well have been decades. But that isn't the end of the story. So think about this for a minute and what it means. No one from the defence asked me formally or informally about these communications, ever. Even Mr. Devlin stopped responding to my emails. No one asked me anything about this for 3 months. Yet, on the very day, likely within hours or even minutes of the logs expiring, the claim is made and distributed publicly and widely that the emails were faked. Like I said, damn impeccable timing. Now think about it from my perspective. For all of these claims to be true, I would need to be an IT genius. Some have claimed that there are some easy ways to fake emails. I haven't tried to do that before, but I'm sure with certain software and between certain email clients and with enough determination, it would be possible to do. Easy? In a Microsoft Office 365 cloud environment? Definitely not. I think you have rocks in your head if you think that would be easy. If you seriously believe that Microsoft would allow their system to be so easily manipulated by me, remember, with very low-level back-end IT skills, then you don't know anything about security protocols. It seems, after working with people over the last few days, the best thing I could have done immediately was to do the video that I posted. And I'm so damn glad I did. And I'll explain why. If I was truly the IT genius that some are claiming, what is covered in that video would have required me to recreate not just the Office 365 environment, but the Google search, the browser, the Office 365 login page, and then all of the emails. And I would have needed to do that in just a few hours. So ask yourself, why would I be skilled enough to do that and then be stupid enough to not know that the server logs expire after 90 days? Surely I would just turn around and forge the logs. I mean, it's suggested that I've faked everything else, right? So regardless of what you think, if you believe that I somehow pulled off the deceit of a lifetime, at least for me, then you are not looking at this rationally at all. And seriously, I strongly suggest that you hang up your mouse and keyboard. Internet warrior sleuthing is definitely not your thing. Go for a walk or go and have a lie down or something. I'm now going to play a second audio clip from the same gentleman that you heard from earlier. Here, he speaks about the security around the emails and matters pertaining to authentication.
Same context for me via the cybersecurity forum on Reddit. I have 20 plus years of experience in IT and cybersecurity, and I'm always willing to help people better understand the nuances of cybersecurity. So Sam was looking for information on how Office 365 verifies email authenticity, specifically regarding protection against email spoofing, such as DKIM. Over the course of our conversation, I told him I would be happy to discuss the general process of email verification, but could not verify specific emails. This is due to chain of custody issues. In any examination of computer-based evidence, tampering is possible and difficult to detect without having full access to the systems involved and a clear trail of possession. During our initial conversation, I noted that the identity of the person on the other end of the email exchange could not be verified unless the messages were digitally signed. Digital signing offers clear authentication and non-repudiation of messages. In other words, if a message is digitally signed, you can be fairly certain the person who sent the message is the owner of the account. There are always exceptions when someone has physical access to devices in question, but that's a far deeper subject. Sam then showed me a video of him accessing his email account, searching for a message, and then viewing the headers. In the video, the DKIM headers are clearly shown. DKIM is used to authenticate email much the same way as digital signing, but it performs transfer authentication and integrity checks between servers rather than between end users. The basic procedure is that the sending server encrypts certain portions of the email using a private key, which can only be decrypted using a corresponding public key. There are several steps to the process, but the server on the receiving end attempts to decrypt the DKIM information with the public key, and if it succeeds and the contents that were hashed by the sending server's algorithms match, then it considers it to have passed the DKIM checks. If certain contents of the message have been modified, they will not match the encrypted hash, and verification will fail, preventing someone from injecting modified information into the message. These checks are done when the message is received by the server, and headers could be modified after the message is downloaded by an email client, but access to headers is not allowed in Office 365. Someone wanting to modify the message would have to download the message, make changes to the header, and then re-import the message. Any error in the process would likely result in the email message being unreadable to the email client. It's possible, but it's not trivial to do so because the email headers are fairly complex. So just a couple of missed keystrokes along the line, and it wouldn't be readable. These checks make DKIM a reliable method of ascertaining if a message you received was indeed sent by a server that is authorized to send email for the domain in question. Again, it does not verify the authenticity of the sender, only the server. But it is how we in the profession will authenticate that a message being sent is from the sending server and not spoofed or spam or phishing attack that may be used to gain additional information.
As I noted at the start of this, I mentioned a second clip that I've uploaded to YouTube. Now, this follows on from recommendations by people that I do a clip whereby I add a voiceover and explain what I am doing during the video. It also includes some steps which I think are important and which I've learnt about over the last several days. I'll bring a few things to your attention about this video. In it, I copy and paste the headers from each of the 5 emails into a service by Microsoft known as Test Connectivity. If you want to check it out, go to testconnectivity.microsoft.com. Those way more tech savvy than me will probably enjoy playing around with it. So, on the recording, I copy each of the headers and paste them into the analyzer offered up by Microsoft. This analyzes the headers and gives you a breakdown of what they mean. These same headers, all 5 of them, have been provided publicly to members of Bob's Facebook page. So you can take those and paste them into the same service to confirm that what I'm doing on the video is indeed above board. Now, that analysis appears to show a few things. It mentions the involvement of a Mac, specifically a reference to Mac OS X Mail 12.2 and to Apple Mail. I don't use a Mac, and I don't know how to use a Mac. If that is indeed what that part of the header is actually referring to, I suggest it means that a Mac has been somehow involved, and I don't have one. Actually, here's an interesting thing to do. If anyone here has received an email from Mr. Devlin, so anyone listening to this podcast, grab the email headers, post them into that test connectivity page, and see what results you get. Another interesting thing you'll note in the video is what happens on Mr. Devlin's second last email to me. That is, the 4th email from him sent on the 13th of March at 7:31 p.m. The first email from him, the second email from him, and the third email from him all contain the previous emails below them. as in the thread is intact. However, on the fourth email from him, that thread is cut. The chain of emails, the history of our communications, is cut off by him in his response to me. It was there in my email to him on the 13th of March at 7:21pm, but 2 replies later at 7:31pm, it is gone. Take a look at it on the video. You also note some of the things he references in these email communications. He references being out of town. He references the files being stored on a closed case server that is not accessible over the internet and is not powered up. What do you think? Do you think that's accurate? Do you think that he was indeed out of town at that time? Do you think the files are stored on a closed case server? Or do you think I made the whole thing up and just happened to fluke it that at the exact time I faked the emails, Mr. Devlin was indeed out of town and I just got it right? So now I need to not only be an IT genius, but I need to have incredible bloody insight. I should tour like John Edward, the psychic, right, with these talents? I suggest to you very confidently, extremely confidently, that these things are all true. That every single word in the emails is true and exactly as Mr. Devlin wrote them. I will say that again and quote this as much as you want. Every single word in every one of those emails is exactly as I received it. The emails have not been altered in any way. They have not been fabricated in any way. They are exactly the way I received them. Now, to probably the most important part of this episode, and I want to get the attention of Ms. Alison Secrest, Mr. Max Secrest, Mr. Eric Devlin, and Ms. Elizabeth Rose. If you can contact any of those people, do so, and even if they do not want to listen to the whole thing, strongly encourage them to listen to the next few minutes of this episode. Ms. Secrest, Mr. Devlin, and Ms. Rose, I've been attempting to get in touch with you since last Friday. Ms. Secrest, I've phoned your office, I've spoken with your office assistant, and I've left a message with her explaining who I am. I asked to speak with you, but apparently you were out. I asked her to draw your attention to my email sent via your business website. I then sent you an email directly to your business email account associated with that website. I also sent you a detailed message via Messenger. It is extremely important that you get in touch with me at your earliest possible convenience. You have my email address, but for the sake of being thorough, it is sam@truthisjustice.com. I've contacted other people and asked them to let you know that I've been trying to get in touch with you as a matter of urgency via the above means. Ms. Secrest, if it is correct that you have authorised Elizabeth Rose to share those text messages publicly and widely, knowing they are false, and knowing what the consequences for me would be, then I suggest that you and I have some very serious discussions ahead of us. I would encourage you to make contact with me at your earliest possible convenience. Mr. Devlin, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I assumed that your professionalism, your career, and your business would mean that these claims being made were not attributable to you. I no longer strongly hold that view. I've sent you various emails and you have not replied. If these claims are correct, and you are indeed making the assertion that the emails are fabricated when you absolutely know that they are not, then I suggest that you and I have some very serious discussions ahead of us. I would encourage you to make contact with me at your earliest possible convenience. Liz, I firstly want to apologise that my immediate assumptions were that you fabricated this interaction. I was of the view that Mr. Devlin would not possibly be stupid enough to risk his career, his professional credibility, and to cause a huge question mark to be cast over the no doubt large number of times he has presented at trial as an expert witness. I'm currently of the view that you passed on the material in good faith, believing it to represent the truth. My suspicion is that you are being used as the messenger here, and in a disgraceful way. For the representatives of a law firm, legal counsel representing your mother, to engage in public opinion games using the daughter of their client is utterly disgusting. It smacks of desperation. To call it amateur hour would be a compliment. I'm sorry you have been used in that way. It isn't on in my book. Mr. Secrest, get in touch with me. I will provide every single bit of material I can obtain in relation to these emails. I have nothing to hide. I am a complete open book on this matter. If you want my hard drives, no worries. If I need to provide authorization to Microsoft or to an analyst to look at the back end of my Office 365 account, consider it given. Most importantly, you have a serious problem on your hands. You have an expert witness, I suggest a very important expert witness for your case, who it is suggested is making statements that are manifestly false. If those claims are true, and he is making those statements, you have an expert witness who is a liar. And I suggest it is going to be hugely problematic for you and this matter going forward. Thank you for listening to Truth is Justice. I look forward to you joining us next week as we continue to set the record straight.